Well, good morning, church, and thanks for having me again. I hope you're not getting tired of seeing me up front over here. As Sergi has said, I've been here 4 or 5 times, and but I've always been told that Canberra National is the best church in Canberra, but now I'm beginning to change my mind actually, and wondering about that. The other thing I want to tell you, and that is I've changed my mind about the message for today. Sorry, storyteller, about that. And I thought, well, the message I was going to preach was on Matthew 24:14, but the expounding of that verse is found in Revelation chapter 14, which is the heart of the book of Revelation. But I thought before we get into all that kind of heavy stuff from the middle of the book of Revelation, you could know me a little bit better. And the presentation that we'll have today hopefully will do that. Yes, and the other reason, of course, is so that I could possibly get the invitation in the future to come and present the message that it was meant for today at some later date. Thank you very much. But you've had already a good sermon from our friend here anyway, so that was very good. Thank you. And also all the joyful singing that I heard this morning. That is very good, and to come down with some kind of heavy stuff from Book of Revelation, even though it's very relevant for the time in which we live and is applicable to what's going on in the world today, especially with the elections that took place last week, and to see what is developing in the United States of America is very relevant to where we live and how we should respond in today's world. But today we're going to have a look at a story, Africa Testimony. As some of you may have detected, I have a South African accent and come from Africa. We came over in 1985 and have been over on this side ever since. But I thought I'd share with you an experience that we had when we were called to the country of Zimbabwe. We have, of course, when you hear of Africa, you think of all the animals that are there. These pictures weren't taken by me, but a friend of mine, Friedrich von Holsten, we went to college together, and he was very interested in photography, and he's taken some of the best animal pictures that I've seen anywhere at all, and he still is taking them. I took these with his permission off Facebook, and I'm sharing them with you a little bit here this morning. But looking at the map of Africa, you see the little country of Lesotho in the middle of the Africa there, and just below the southern point of Lesotho, you see Drakensberg Mountains. And that is where I grew up, in the foothills of the Drakensberg Mountains. That's my mum and dad on the farm that we had with my older sister Marlene. And Dad, this is the farm that I grew up on. Dad built the 3 rondavels that we first moved into and lived there for about 6 years, and then Dad had built the bigger house, all out of materials from the farm. Another picture of the farm house over there. So that's my home country and home farm. Not too far away is the Tsitsa Gorge, which is about 4 kilometers from our farm as the crow flies, but you'd have to wind around the mountains. And there was a leopard sighted in that gorge not too many years ago. Even though we don't have big wildlife in the Eastern Cape, but that one was there. You see the falls over there. When they're in full flood, it looks like that, and it's quite a spectacle to see. My cousin had a farm over the top of the berg, and I often would go with him to go and dose the sheep over on top of the berg. And so that was my background. I was always told that the prettiest girls come from Durban. So when I first met the first girl from Durban, I proposed to her and got married to her straight away. And she surprisingly has been with me ever since. We were at college when we met, and I was pastor in South Africa for a few years. I was in a town called Grahamstown, which is just a little bit further along that town, Port Elizabeth, over there in the Eastern Cape. And we were there when we received a call to go to Zimbabwe and serve in the Zimbabwe field. Right up north, the green country there in Zimbabwe. And we were called to Mutare, which is on the eastern highlands of Mutare. Now, it was just a year after, this is 1981 beginning, just a year after the end of the civil war that had taken place in Zimbabwe. And so the place was still a little bit uneasy and chaotic. It was 3,080 kilometers, I worked it out, for us to travel from Grahamstown, where we were, in our car up to Mutare in Zimbabwe. We were told as we crossed the border, not to go through the Lowveld, which is the southern part of Zimbabwe there. You'll notice the road going from Beitbridge straight up to Mutare on the eastern highlands. We were told not to go on that road because it was still too dangerous, but we were to first go to Bulawayo, which is the center in the green area there, capital of Matabele land, as they call it, and from there to go up to Harare, the capital up in the purple area, and from Harare to go down to Mutare, to go all the way around the top of the country to get down to the eastern part. Because of the security situation in the country. And so as we had gone from Grahamstown up to our farm to say goodbye to my parents, and then to Durban to say goodbye to Denise's parents. And we were staying over in Joburg when we received the bad news about the Lales. And this is a picture I took in Adventist World. It came out in the November issue last year. It's exactly a year since that article came out. But you can read up about the story about the Lales. Unfortunately, they were murdered at a mission station just about 50 kilometers outside the place where we were going in Mutare. Fortunately, their sons were not with them. It was just Dan and his wife who were murdered. They were on the mission station, and it was evening. They had a knock at the door, and there was a terrorist with an AK-47, and Mrs. Lale was bashed on the head and then shot. And then they took Mr. Lale to the school hall where the school was having a meeting, and together with the students in this hall. And they bashed him to death with a garden hoe. And that's the horrific story of the Lales. And so we were quite upset about this news, and so we phoned the church and we said, "What's going on? Is it still safe for us to go? What shall we do?" So they said, "Well, in the end, they put the onus on us. They said, if you still want to go, the position is still open for you, but if you want to stay, that's okay. We'll have a position for you back in South Africa." So we prayed about it earnestly, and I did one of those things that you usually don't do when you're looking for God's will, and that is just to open up your Bible and ask God to give you a text in answer to your prayer. And so that's what we did. We were kind of in a desperate situation, and we needed to have a definite answer to our prayer. And so the Lord gave us an answer, and that was in Acts chapter 18 and verse 9 and 10. And the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, "Do not be afraid, but speak and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no man shall attack you to harm you." So that was, we couldn't have expected a more direct answer to prayer than that one. So we continued on our way. And as I say, we crossed, our first destination was going to be Bulawayo, where just outside Bulawayo was Salusi College. And Denise's uncle was the rector at that college. And so we were going to stay with them and then carry on to Harare and then down to Mutare. We were told not to stop on the road, but with 3 kids in the car, you had to have some stops. And so this is the first picture that we took as we came into Zimbabwe. And yes, we had to stop at this site as well, as some giraffe crossed the road and forced us to stop and have a look at them. Now, you may notice that, yes, I did have a Mercedes, a true colonialist, if you like. And but when we had the call to go to Zimbabwe, fortunately, my brother-in-law helped us out in getting this car, because the family didn't want to see us breaking down on the roads in a still rather dangerous country. And so we was driving around in that Mercedes. As we came closer to Bulawayo, we noticed a whole lot of traffic going around, bristling armored vehicles, bristling with men on the back and guns and so on. And we were wondering what was going on. And when I got into Bulawayo itself, there was no one there at the marketplace, and there was hardly any cars driving around. We didn't see any cars driving around. And we didn't know it, but we had walked or driven straight into what was called the Ntumbane uprising, which was lasted from February 8 to 12 in 1981. The Lales were murdered on the 3rd of February, and that's when we heard the news, I think on the 4th or the 5th. And we came into Zimbabwe soon after that. I can't remember the exact date. This is a picture I took off the internet, not one of mine. But you can read up about the Ntumbane uprising on Wikipedia. And so what was happening over there was that Joshua Nkomo, who was an Ndebele from the Ndebele tribe, was making a bid to make Bulawayo his capital and secede from Mugabe, who had the whole country, the central part and the eastern part, which is Shona, and Joshua Nkomo was in Ndebele. And so there was this almost civil war that was about to take place, but it was very rapidly put down, surprisingly, by the forces that were fighting for Ian Douglas Smith in the Civil War, which were now under the command of Robert Mugabe. And so they were the ones who put down the former enemies of Mugabe, who were now fighting for him, and they put down the uprising very quickly. But the official count of people who were killed in that uprising was 260, but the historians feel that 300 to 400 is more likely the number. But here we were driving straight into Bulawayo, into the middle of all this, not knowing what was going on. And Salusi University now is 50 k's outside of Bulawayo, and that's the road to get to Salusi. We went out, and this is Salusi as it is today. And I must tell you the story of Salusi College as well, because it starts with this man over here, Peter Wessels, who was the first Seventh-day Adventist in South Africa. Before any missionaries came over from America, Adventist missionaries, This man had studied his Bible and came across the truth of the Sabbath and was disfellowshipped from the Dutch Reformed Church for promoting the Sabbath. And there were other teachings that he was coming across which were Adventist. And so he, together with George van Druten, he actually owned a diamond mine in Kimberley. And this William Hunt fellow had come over, he was an Adventist, had come over from America to do some diamond prospecting in Kimberley. And so they met the first Adventist coming over who was a prospector. And this William Hunt told them about the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, and Peter Wessels bought straight into that. And then when William Hunt went back to America after his work in Kimberley, Peter Wessels gave him some money to send a pastor over to South Africa to teach them further the truths that he was beginning to understand, and to baptize them and to start a church in South Africa. And the church saw this as a Macedonian call, and so they sent over two pastors who did exactly that. They baptized Peter Wessels and 20 other people, and they started the Beaconsfield Church in Kimberley, which was the first Seventh-day Adventist church in Kimberley. Together on that same year, which is 1895, this man here, Richard Morcall, was also baptized on that day. It's interesting to see that the black work started at the same time that the white work started. And he was from my country. I grew up amongst the Amaxhosa people, and I speak their language. Yagonda Lentunditeta Mfundin. No Ndebele people over here. So, all right, okay. Ndebele is very closely associated with Xhosa and also Zulu. They're kind of three family languages. But yes, Richard Morcall, which I wish I knew more about him. He seems an interesting fellow. But Peter Wessels in the center there, and Pastor Robinson, the man on the right over there, went to the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, a man by the name of Cecil John Rhodes on the left over there. He was a wealthy man. He owned De Beers Consolidated Mines, which was the diamond mining company in South Africa. And they went to him because they heard that there were parcels of land up in Zimbabwe that could be given, and they asked if they could have a parcel of land from him to establish a school for the Matabele people. So when they were talking to Cecil John Rhodes, he wrote out some notes on a piece of paper. He folded that, put it into an envelope, sealed it, and gave it to Pastor Robinson and Peter Wessels. And he said, "You take this letter to my friend, Dr. Jamison, who is my agent in Bulawayo, and give it to him and see what comes from that." So Peter Wessels and Pastor Robinson hopped on the train and went up to Bulawayo, all the 2,500 kilometers by train, and handed the letter over to Dr. Jamison. And by the way, you may have heard of a Rhodes Scholarship, which is this man who established a Rhodes Scholarship very early in the piece. And men like Bill Clinton, Bob Hawke, Tony Abbott, and Malcolm Turnbull have benefited from the Rhodes Scholarship. Interesting to know that what that man established is still being run today, and people like that have, you take a Rhodes Scholarship, you go to Oxford University and study what you need to over there. Anyway, they went to this Dr. Jamison, and it's amazing that Dr. Jamison was a medical doctor at first, before he entered into politics. And in fact, he was a medical doctor for Peter Wessels when they were in Kimberley. And so they knew each other. And so they arrived there in Bulawayo, And they handed the letter that Cecil John Rhodes had written out and handed it to Dr. Jamieson. And he read the letter and then took out another piece of paper and wrote out a grant of land to the Adventist Church, a land of 12,000 acres. Yes, 12,000 acres of land. And that's where Seleucia College is today. There is Peter Wessels and his wife. His wife corresponded with Ellen White, who was in Australia at that time. And through that correspondence, Peter Wessels sent over some money, an amount of equivalent to 200,000 Australian dollars today, to establish Avondale College here in Australia. So it's quite amazing the connection that we have over there with Australia. So there's Avondale College, and of course he gave money to establish the work in South Africa as well. There's Seleucia College, or Seleucia University now, at graduation day, celebrating the graduates over there. So it's amazing the work that has established. Now, not too far from Seleucia University is the Matopo National Park. And right there in that park is the grave of Cecil John Rhodes. It was in his will that he wanted to be buried in the Matopos when he died. And so when he died, they had a funeral procession in Cape Town, quite a big one. They put his casket on the train, and he was taken up to Bulawayo. And from Bulawayo, he was put on an ox cart and taken to the Matopos, and that's where he's buried at the moment. And it's amazing that the Matabele chief and the Matabele tribe, who had their headquarters close to them in the Matopo Mountains, they came along to the funeral service as well, and they said to the British who were there to celebrate the funeral, the internment of Cecil John Rhodes, they told them not to shoot their guns in the service because this would disturb the peace of the area, and they themselves gave him the Royal Matabele salute, Bayete. And so it's quite amazing that one of the greatest colonialists of all time, if you like, was buried right there in the middle of Matabele land and had the Royal Matabele salute, which they only reserved for the big Matabele chiefs of the time. So that's the story of Seleucia College. Well, because of the Ntumbani uprising, we were holed up in Seleucia. We couldn't move until we got permission from the police that the road was safe to continue in our journey. And so we stayed at Seleucia, I think, up to almost 3 weeks before they said we could go. However, while we were at Seleucia, the one day we're walking down to the playing fields. It was evening. I took this picture off the internet, by the way. It's not my picture, but it's very much like the evening that I'm describing. And we were going down to the play fields together with Denise's uncle and family to go and watch some of the students playing. And we met another group coming from at right angles to us. And we met in this kind of dark clump of trees. And we recognized the treasurer. And we wanted to talk to her, but she said she has had some very important business to do, and that she would catch up with us later. And I remember there were some men with her as well. And I even thought that one of them was one of the students at college. And I walked up to him and I said, "Oh, are you a student over here?" And he said, "Yes." So I said, "Oh, what subject are you taking?" And then he didn't answer, and he just gave a kind of a gruff response to my question. What was happening over there is that terrorists had come onto the grounds, and they had gone to Mrs. McGee, who is the treasurer, took her out at gunpoint and said, "Do you take us to the office, and we want the money out of the safe in the office." And the funny thing about it is that when we were sitting in the lounge of Dr. Hurler, Denise's uncle, I had a little skipperkey dog, and it started barking, and I said to Dr. Hurler, "There's somebody at the door." And he got up and went to the door and opened it, and there was no one there. In fact, the dog had barked twice, and I said, "My dog doesn't bark for nothing, there's somebody at the door." So that's when he got up to go to the door and have a look, but there's no one there. But evidently what Mrs. McGee had said is that they had come to her, and then they had come to the Hurler home to get the rector and take him at gunpoint as well to go and get all the money, because it was graduation day, and they expected big money to be in the safe. But the staff at Salushi had expected something like that to happen, and in the case of that happening, they'd put an amount of about $350, I think it was, in a smaller safe in the office, and they would give that money to whoever came to take the proceeds. Meanwhile, the big money was in a bigger safe elsewhere. So they had kind of tricked them in anticipation. But it was a close shave, because who knows what could have happened in that situation. And so anyway, after about 3 weeks, we phoned the police in Bulawayo, and they said, "Okay, you can travel." But they said, the cop that I spoke to on the phone, he said, "Well, just make sure you've got enough petrol to go all the way up to Harare without filling up anywhere. You mustn't stop anywhere." And he said, "Don't worry about the speed limit. Go as fast as you can." It's the first time I've been told by a speed cop to disregard the speed limit and go as fast as I can. So I had that Mercedes, so we went traveling, and sometimes I saw the speedometer up to 155, 160 kilometers an hour, probably as fast as the car could go. But then we came to on the road, this is a picture I took at some other time, but it shows the little seat on the side of the road with a cement table where people can stop and have tea or something. And we approached a place like that, and there was a car that had pulled up, and I thought, they shouldn't be doing that. They should not be stopping on the road. But they were obviously having some tea at the table. And as we came up to them, I heard this pop, 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 very loud sound. And at first I thought it was a blowout on my car. But the car didn't swerve, and it was okay. But then I realized after a few seconds, this is not my car, this is gunfire I'm hearing. And what happened, I don't know, but when I realized that it was gunfire, I accelerated faster, and in my rearview mirror, I saw the couple that had been sitting on the side over there clambering into their car, and that's the last I saw of it. Who knows what happened then, I don't know. But as we rode on this road, you could see that there were lots of wrecks on the side of the road that had been burnt out. Most of them had been taken away already, but you could see the burnt out area, and that was all from the Sentumbane uprising that had taken place in Bulawayo. Anyway, we eventually got to, that shows you the strip tarred roads that you get in Zimbabwe. I took this at a later time. When you're traveling on the road like that, you travel in the middle of the tarred road, but when you see a car coming from the other side, you move over with your left wheels on the gravel and your right wheels on the tar, and the opposite person does the same. You pass each other, and then you get back onto the tar again. And that's how you travel in Zimbabwe. We got to Harare, and this is the church and hall. It is the division headquarters at the time, and we went on down to Mutare. And that's coming down into Mutare. It doesn't show you the actual town itself, But Christmas Pass, you can see down there on the right-hand side, is a pass called Christmas Pass as you come down into the city itself. The rest of our time in Matari was good. It didn't have such an exciting episode as we had on the entry into the country. At the end of 3 years, we left Matari after having a very good 3 years there. The Shona people are very creative and they create these marvelous creations out of soapstone. And here you have what they created and sell at the garage. I had the Florida church there. These are the leaders of the Florida church. Our head elder, Daniel Marunduri, and his wife, Phoebe. Buddy Hall and his wife, Celia. He owned the bus company in Zimbabwe and ran that very successfully. Enos Mlochwa and Betty, his wife, also an elder in the church. And we had opportunity to go out to Inyazura, where the Lales had been murdered, and we had a look at the situation there. That's the school block that you see there, which I took when we were there. It has a church on it as well, and also it had a medical clinic. There were 5 medical clinics in Zimbabwe, and Dr. Les Wright serviced these 5 clinics through the country. And when he serviced that clinic, he would come and stay with us in Matari and service the clinic from there. So another colleague of mine was Pastor Makauri. And he had the church in Sakubva. And this is camp meeting for Pastor Makauri's church. They go out and have camp meeting. And this is really like the Feast of Tabernacles in the Bible, where they'd go out and have palm leaves and natural vegetation that they would make into their little tents or habitations, and then they would listen to the sermons, which was preached around there as well. So, yes, we are kind of running out of time over here, but let's quickly tell you a story. We had these students from the 2 teachers training colleges in Matari, who every Friday night they came to us to open Sabbath with us, and but unfortunately they could not get time off on Sabbath. When the exams were scheduled for Saturday, they could not get the time off. They'd asked the principal if they could write the exam on some other day except Saturday, but they couldn't get that privilege. And so I tell this to the education director, Gus Solomons, the man right on the left over there. And he then came down. We invited him to come down to meet the students on our Friday night meeting. And then he stayed with us the weekend. He preached on Sabbath. And then on Monday, we had an appointment with the principals, both from the Public Teachers Training College and the Roman Catholic Teachers Training College as well. And we arrived in the office, and I told them the purpose of our visit. And immediately the principal said, "No, sorry, we can't give that privilege to the students." And so, and so then Gus Solomons then told his story. He said he was a school teacher in Bulawayo, and a time came when the principalship was open for application, and he applied to be a principal of that school. It was a boarding school in Bulawayo. And he was the first non-white to apply for that position. And so he applied for the position, but in the application, he said, on Saturdays, I will not be taking any duty on Saturdays during the sports for the school, because I'm an Adventist, and that's my Sabbath day. And so that was the clause that he put into his application. And one of the people on the board actually came to him and said, "Listen, Gus, you're at a disadvantage already with you being the first non-white to apply for this position. But he said this clause about Saturday and you not doing duties on Saturday, he said that'll definitely put you out. So Gus Solomons then said, well, this clause about the Sabbath is non-negotiable. If they don't want me, that's okay. So the application went in, and he was successful. He gained success as the principal of that school. I forget what the name of the school was. And he was there for about 11, 15 years, if I remember. And he ran a very successful principalship in that school. So when he told that story to the two principals, they said yes. And so from there on, our students at these two teachers training colleges stayed at our place on a Saturday night from the time that the exam was written until I invigilated the exams on the Sunday morning. And so it was done that way. So it's amazing how Lord has led. And I'll finish off with some more wildlife. There's a black eagle that we went to go and see up in the mountains there, and it had a hide that was next to it that was put up by Uncle John, one of the members of the Kingsway Church. And there you see the actual eagle standing on the nest. The hide was right next to the nest. And the way to get up there was to climb up the tree and then go up on that branch and then hop over from the branch onto the rock, and then you go into the hide. The eagles knew that we were there when we were in there, but as long as you did not show yourself, they seemed to be happy to sit on the nest. But if you appeared, then of course they would go. And I got some very good pictures of I only had a small little fixed lens, 35mm camera, so you can see how close we actually were. The female is sitting on the little white chick, and the male is coming in, landing with some green leaves in his beak. And this shot I got as well, carrying some. There you see a little monkey actually on the nest itself that they fed on. And here's another picture. The chick is now grown almost an adult, but it still hasn't left the nest. And the one adult is coming in carrying a little duiker, which is a small antelope, and the other one is covering up from behind. So you wait for a long time and nothing happens, but then suddenly they come around that corner and you've got to be ready and take your picture. And so I got a few pictures there. Herbert Sibanda is an amazing story, and I'll end off here with Herbert's story. I was doing studies with a couple in Mutare, and this lady was very, very interested in the studies, but her husband was not. And he wanted to stop the studies, but I said to the lady, taking a risk, I said, but do you want to carry on? And she said yes, because I could see she was very keen on the studies. So he stopped coming, and the wife continued. But then we had to have a chaperone to be there as well, so that things looked right. And I carried on the studies with the wife. And this chaperone was boarding with them. He was a young man. And he would sit in the room as we did the study, but he didn't participate in the study. He sat in the far end of the room, and often he sat on the floor, and he didn't show any interest in the studies at all. But every time I finished the study with the lady, I would hand her the brochure, the little lesson that goes with it, and I'd go over to him and hand him the lesson as well. And so that went on, but the husband then brought the studies to an end, and I then gave her the rest of the lessons and said goodbye, and said goodbye to the guy who was sitting on the floor there, and off we went. And that was the end of the story. That was 1983, and we left at the end of 1983. And then 23 years later, my wife and I were at Fulton College. These are some of my theology students at Fulton College. 23 years later, as we were at Fulton College, I got a phone call from London. I'm Herbert Sibanda, he says, do you remember me? I said, no, I don't. Sorry about that. And he said, well, I'm that, that young guy who was sitting at the far end of the room. He said, I was a Methodist at the time, and as you gave all those lessons out, I would teach them in the Methodist church on the Sunday. And but this upset the pastor of the church, and he realized afterwards that he had to leave, and so he left and then got baptized by Pastor McCowry, the picture that we saw earlier on. So yes, the Lord indeed had kept his promise. Do not be afraid, but speak and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no man shall attack you to harm you, is the promise of the Lord, and he kept that with us. Amen.